Morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome back today. Our programme today encompasses Mary Bourne and Bridget Clesham from the Landed Estates project will be speaking to start on relation to their project. Then we will go into the genealogical workshop with Concepta, Mary and Dr. Brendan Scott. Then Dr. William Ralston will speak on researching our farming ancestry. Then that ends the session in the library here. Creative Ireland are very generous in relation to national funding, and we'd just like to acknowledge them in this instance. Now, our two speakers to start today are from the Landed Estates project. Mary Bourne is a Special Collections Librarian in the University of Galway. She has an MSc in Genealogical Studies and has been working on this project for 15 years, as has her colleague Bridget Clesham, who is a historical researcher, archivist and author of 2 books on local history, including Tír McCady in County Mayo, and they've both been working on this project for 15 years, and now they're going to talk about Landed Estates in Cavan. So over to you, ladies.
It's gratifying to see such an enormous crowd here, and it's a great tribute to the work of Mary and Concepta and Brendan and all of the people involved I know what it's like to put together a conference like this and how nerve-wracking it is, and they'll all need a week off afterwards. So thank you very much as well. We foisted ourselves upon them in a way because I saw the programme. And we've been working, as Tommy pointed out, on the Landed Estates project for 15 years. But in 2022, we received funding from the Heritage Council to work on and extend the research on the 3 counties in Ulster that are in the Republic of Ireland, so Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan. And it's only very recently that the work that we've done, the research data, has been put up publicly on the website. The website has been made live to include that data. So I thought it was an ideal opportunity for people who are interested in immigration from Cavan and genealogical studies relating to Cavan and so on to see the information that we have on the database. So just a very quick introduction to what the database is. We started in 2005 looking at this, and it grew out of the work that Bridget and I do, because I'm a librarian and Bridget's an archivist, and we would constantly get requests from researchers and scholars and people out in the community and so on for information, or at least for guidance as to where they could find information about the landed estates that they, in whatever area they were working on. And it's important to remember that landed estates were effectively the economic underpinning of the society in Ireland for effectively, certainly the 18th and 19th centuries. And everybody lived on a landed estate, whether they were in a town or a rural area, whether they were the estate owner or they were a tenant or they were somebody working on the estate, it was very difficult to not have connections with them. So that was the motivation for us doing this project. We received funding to do some work. First of all, we thought we were just going to do County Galway because we were working in the University of Galway at the time, and of course it grew and grew. So we began with the it's disappeared now. We began with the estates in the western counties, Mayo and Galway to start with. Then we moved on to Sligo, Leitrim and Roscommon. Sometime after that we got some funding to work on the Munster counties, and primarily that was because of where we're located. We often get a lot of queries relating to County Clare. And those of you who are 17th century scholars will know that until the 17th century, Clare was part of Connacht. So therefore, the Clare people were always asking questions too. So we moved in and we did the work on the Munster counties. And then for many years we didn't get any funding until happily we got the Heritage Council funding. And we decided to work on the 3 Ulster counties primarily because there's quite a lot of overlap with particularly Sligo and Leitrim. with the counties like Cavan and Donegal, and also because Bridget was working on another commissioned research at the time relating to County Monaghan, and she had assembled a lot of information relating to Monaghan estates, and she felt she didn't want this to go, you know, not to waste exactly, but that more people would be able to access it if that information was on the database. So that's where we're coming from with the database. It's important to say this is a signpost. You're not going to see the actual, you know, archival documents or books or anything like that. What you're going to see is a short description of each estate, the houses that were on the estate. And the houses are the thing that capture most people's imagination. We're constantly getting asked about houses. And most importantly, from our perspective, 3 kinds of information. Archival sources, so that would be material that's in archives and principally unpublished. Contemporary printed sources, so that would be things like Griffith's valuation, for example, that were published at the time that the estate still existed. And increasingly, of course, and certainly in the lifetime of our project, most of that material has become available online. When we started the project, Griffiths was still the big blue books, and we had to look at the big blue books. We still use the big blue books, mind you, because it's the easiest way to go through the whole thing. But it's available to everybody now because it's online. And then finally, we also try to record as much as we can things that have been written in recent times about the estates. So journal articles, local histories, biographies of maybe somebody who lived on the estate or something like that. So we try to be a kind of a comprehensive signpost to where you can start research. And the type of query that we get would be very related to the theme of this conference, because many of the people that contact us are living elsewhere and are trying to find out sometimes, first of all, what estate their ancestors might have lived on, and then secondly, is there any information about that? Is there anything surviving that would show information about their ancestors? So they're the kind of queries we get. So of course it's directly related to the theme of the conference here, you know. So I think now the easiest thing, rather than speaking theoretically, is Bridget is going to show you a couple of the estate entries for estates from County Cavan, and kind of talk you through the elements of that. And then at the end I'll just show you the general website structure, because, you know, people might have interest in estates in other parts of the country, and of course lots of the landowners had land in many different counties, and that's a very important thing to remember as well. So over to you, Bridget.
Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Landed Estates database. There's various ways of finding the information you want on the database. The easiest way really is to go in through estates or through the houses. So I'm just going to show you, demonstrate a couple of entries. So I'm going to go in for the Humphreys estate. Of Ballyhaise. So you put in your name and you go search. Okay, so quite often there's various names that come up, and that means that the Humphreys estate or the name Humphreys is referenced in all those entries. So you click on Humphreys, and this is what an estate entry looks like. Okay, so it begins with an explanation of the history of the estate and perhaps the family, and then associated families. So the Humphreys brought their estate from the Newburgh. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, but Newburgh. Yeah, Newburgh. Yeah. So they bought it from the Newburghs, and I'll just go down first, but you can go click on Newburgh then, and it'll bring you into the Newburgh entry. So you begin with an explanation of the estate, a little write-up on the estate and the family, and then you scroll down and you get the 3 houses that are entered in for that particular estate. You go down to the map, and the location of those 3 houses is on the map. Okay, and then you go down, and here you have the archival sources. Now for this particular estate, you have, I think it's 6 archival collections. Some are in the same repository, but the National Library, the National Archives and the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland are the ones shown here. So we've looked in all those repositories for records and many other repositories, both in Ireland and in the UK, and in local libraries and in university libraries, and also for some archives are held in private possession. So then you go down to the list of contemporary printed sources, and then the modern printed sources. Okay, and then if you want to look at the houses, okay, we'll go into Ballyhaise, because that was their main house. Click on that, and then you get a picture, all the location details of Ballyhaise House, a little description of the house itself, and quite often, if there is an image, the Buildings of Ireland have kindly let us use a lot of their images, so they're included. And then you get a bigger map of where Ballyhaise House is actually located. So I just show you, you can also from here you can go into Newburgh, because they also lived at Ballyhaise. So there you get a bit of a longer description, and just one house and the same thing. But there may be different archival sources for Ballyhaise under Newburgh ownership. And you can see here that there is also stuff here in the Cavan County Archives relating to Newburgh of Ballyhaise. And I must say that the Cavan County Archives service is wonderful. It has this great collection of small private collections, and they're all very well described by, I don't know what archivist listed them, but they're very well done and in great detail. So I have used them quite a lot, and they appear in many entries. So again, then there's all the different sources. I'm just going to show you another estate now. Somebody was asking me yesterday about the Mortimers. I think the lady is just outside the door, but just to show you another one. I spelled Mortimer wrong. E-R. Yeah. Okay, so the Mortimers of Lakeview. So again, this is an estate that was established in the middle of the 17th century, and we have a source for this. I don't know if you're familiar with this, the Parliamentary Papers, the 15th Annual Report of the Commissioners of Public Records. They contains grants under the Acts of Settlement, and that's been very useful to find out who got what in the middle of the 17th century. So that's a very useful contemporary source for the establishment of the estates. So the Mortimer estate is here. It's as far as I know, it still belongs to descendants of the Mortimers, Jonathan and Daphne Shackleton. Daphne Shackleton's a very well-known garden expert. And of course, Jonathan Shackleton is one of the Shackletons of the Explorer, yeah. So there you go, there's just one house there, and there isn't very many archival sources, or at least I didn't find very many archival sources, although it is mentioned in the Farnham Papers. But there is, if anybody's, as one of you obviously are, interested in this particular estate, there is a report on the Mortimer Papers in the National Library, which would indicate to me that perhaps they still have the papers in their own possession. So that would be a way of following up on it, would be to contact the Shackletons, I think. And then again, Lakeview is here. Picture of the house from the Buildings of Ireland, again, the same information. Somebody else was asking about the Beresford estate. I'll just go into that. Now, the Beresford estate, sorry. My spelling isn't that bad, I'm just... So here's the Lepore Beresford estate. So quite a long description of them and a huge amount of houses, particularly for Waterford. They also had houses in Galway, Cavan, and you know, they were all over the place. So, and then huge amount of archival sources as well. So anybody there will have to be fairly discerning about where they want to go to check if their ancestor was lived on a particular part of the Beresford estate. So on and on it goes. Now, if you want to, for example, have a look at other estates that might be mentioned in one of the secondary sources, like Ambrose Leith's directory, if you click on that, you go into all the estates that are cited in that particular source. So there's over 1,200 estates cited from Leith's directory. So that can be quite useful sometimes if people want to see. And another way of going into the data sources is, you see up in the corner it says data sources. If you click on that, you get the reference sources. You click on the reference sources and then they're all listed here in a big long line. So something like the Clogher record, for example. You can go in there and you see all the details about all the estates that the Clogher record is cited in. I just showed the Cavan Archive Service too. I think it's about 6 or 7. No, well, anyway, you know how to find it there. It's there as well. I just go back again to the reference sources. These contemporary printed sources are where you can access things like Griffiths valuation. If you click on the Ask About Ireland site there, it'll bring you into Griffiths valuation. So that's helpful to parliamentary papers and various other contemporary sources, mostly, that are now online. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea then, and from the estate side. And then from the houses side, you can go directly into various houses. For example, Strandorn, which is the Burroughs house. You just click on it and it brings you directly into the house. So if you're just particularly interested in a house, that house no longer exists, but there is a gate lodge. Okay, so maybe Farnham, relevant to here. Probably a lot, Farnham Castle. So it gives you all the location details, a little description of the house itself, where it's located. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea anyway. it's best if you go in and experiment yourself. It's pretty easy to follow.
So I'm conscious that Brendan and Mary have lots of other sources to talk to you about. So just before we finish, you can see here that there's information about a map. Now the map is giving us some trouble at the moment. A whole bunch of my Donegal houses are turning up in Crossmolina in North Mayo. And there's plenty of houses in Crossmolina already. This is how the map looks for the 14 counties that the project has covered so far, so you can see there's quite a spread. And each of those blue pins represents a barony. I assume most people know that a barony is an older administrative unit, and I think Mary or Brendan are going to be mentioning them again anyway. So what you do is if you click on a blue pin, you see the name, this is Tullygarvey, and then you can just click on it again and it will zoom in, and the houses that are located in that barony. So Bridget showed you how each house has locational details attached to it, and the barony is always one of the locational details. So that's how it recognises, or at least it should recognise where the houses should be, except as I said that it's put some of my Donegal houses in Crossmolina. I don't know why that is, but we have a few glitches, because it's just recently gone up, so we're hoping to iron those out as soon as possible. So we also have an email address that you can contact us at if you have queries. It's it's landedestates@universityofgalway.ie. It changed recently, but it's on the website anyway. So you can send it.
Info at.
Sorry.
The next bit we got info at. I didn't get the next bit.
Sorry, I'll say it again. It's landedestates@universityofgalway.ie. But it's on the website anyway. And you can send us an email. That's the easiest way to contact us, really. landedestates@universityofgalway.ie. Okay? So thank you very much for listening, and I hope people will derive benefit from using the database.
Is Jane out there?
Jane?
Just there's one slide.
What?
One slide at a time. Just a little chalice thing. Down there, the fire army was coming up with the other slides as well.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you don't have that.
Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome back everybody who was here yesterday and anybody new. So we're just going to briefly go through some of the major sources for genealogical research, and I suppose since it's called a workshop, I think what we're planning to do is just to get you to ask us to do some searches while we're here. We're going to look at a few sites, so Concepta and Brendan are going to be talking along with myself. Not sure how this is, it's not working the same as yesterday. Yeah, okay. So just simply first steps. I know that a lot of you here are nearly professional genealogists in your own right, and we have Mary here, who's a real expert. So, and I know a lot of you know a lot of stuff about doing your researching your ancestors, but there'll always be a few who may not. So, just the first steps. Always start with just what you know, and going back to parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, anybody older than yourself who will have information. For me, it's the most important part of starting a genealogical journey, because if you're not going to know everything yourself, so you need to ask, as I said, listen and note down. And everybody's family history is different, so it's not possible to say this is the route for everybody. Everybody has a different route. Where are we now? Okay, so just the main sources that we use in Cavan and in most of the genealogical centres. Church records of baptisms, marriages and burials. They do not have a universal starting date. Each parish is different depending on its history and circumstances. So, for example, in County Cavan, our earliest church record is the Church of Ireland parish of Kilmore, which the baptisms begin in 1701. There are obviously gaps. The earliest Roman Catholic records, the parish of Castlerahan, beginning in 1751, but again, gaps. And the latest Roman Catholic parish is the parish of Lara, beginning in 1876. So we go from 1701 to 1876 in starting dates, and all the dates in between. So there is no universal starting date for church records, and it's very important to remember that. Civil records of births, deaths and marriages available for the whole country, available online now, free. I shouldn't be saying that, but anyway, they're available online, free, from 1864, with non-Catholic marriages from 1845. Bridget, talked about the landed estates, and Mary mentioned Griffith's valuation, again free online, as is the tithe allotment books. So Griffith's valuation, sort of post-famine land records, and William will be talking more about land records in his farming talk later on, and the tithe allotment, a sort of a pre-famine. Again, they only have head of household, so they're not terrific sources in many ways, but because of the lack of other sources, they have secured an importance, I suppose, in their own right. Just to look at what's included sometimes in the church records, a little bit of good material. So this, I just can't remember what parish it is, but a little note on the side of a baptism record that on the 21st of November 1909, this person married Bessie Charters from Ballin Temple in St. Francis Xavier Church, New York. So that's a great little piece of information and there's lots of those little snippets on Roman Catholic records. So other sources, newspapers, again Mary referred to these, local history, books, journals, and of course local knowledge. And our own researcher here, Concepta McGovern, is just, she has a head, I don't know where all her information comes from. As Brendan says, she scares me, she knows so much, and that is a fact. She has such an amount of local knowledge. She does come from the town of Cavan here, and she has an enormous wealth of knowledge. Gravestone inscriptions, of course, estate records, and I think the landed estates there, the fact that they grow through the houses and that you can see, you know, 1 to whatever number of records that are available, where they're available and what they are, leases, etc. I think it's a fantastic job that Mary and Bridget have done. Directories, commercial and occupational, which give, you know, what businesses at different times. So I think we have 1824 different directories and different times, wills and deeds. So my own personal favourite is newspaper. At the moment, my personal favourite is newspapers. I think they are just such a wonderful source of information. This is just in relation to what I spoke about yesterday. The first one there is Mary Dolan. She married James Maguire and she lived to be 90 years. Now, you can't take that to be fact either. It says age 90 years. I couldn't find her birth, and the various census in America, the records are not, the ages are not consistent with each other. But the one on the wife, I knew that his brother was married to his wife's sister Mary, but I couldn't prove it really because the Church of Ireland records do not give mother's maiden name until much, much later. I knew in my heart and soul they were sisters, but I couldn't actually prove it. But there is the proof, because his sister, James Stephen's sister, was giving evidence at his trial, and she said, I have a brother married to a sister of his wife. So there was the proof. That was the evidence in court. So the next slide, I just ask Concepta to talk about it. This is all right.
I messed them up.
Okay.
This is a query we got there very recently, actually, and a lady came and she told me that she was researching Dr. James Matthews, who was born in County Tipperary, but served here as a doctor, and he died before 1901, so we didn't have any indication where he came from. So we looked at the death records, and he died all right at 60 years of age, a young man, and this was in the Anglo-Celt, of course, to see what was there for him, and it gave very sad death and so on, and it was sudden, and about him being brought to the cathedral and in front of the high altar in the cathedral. But then I think it might be on the next slide, Mary, that the funeral came up Cavan Town, and the children from the poorer Clare and the industrial school walked with the coffin the whole way and escorted it on its journey out to Lara. Now, Lara, I would have expected him to be buried here locally in Cavan Town because it's easy when you're living locally. But anyway, I think it's the next slide might say, he was buried in a grave out in Lara parish that hadn't been open in 120 years. And it belonged to Father Felix Matthews. And the grave was, the headstone was put up in memory of his son, Dr. Felix Matthews, but the headstone was put up by Brian, his father. But Father Felix was born in 1837 and buried out in Lara. So there had to be a connection between this Dr. Matthews. How do they know to go out to Lara with this man if he was born in Tipperary? And I searched Tipperary records and found no reference to him at all. So we went to see his children. He had 6 children, but the wife disappeared after he died. And then we went to see where he got married. So he got married in Scotland. And on his marriage, it said he was born in Cavan, Ireland. And it gave his father as Michael Matthews and his mother as Sarah O'Connell. And it gave her, his wife's people as well. So then I went to look for his wife's obituary to see when she died. She died in England, but her obituary was published again in the Anglo-Celt, and it said that she was a daughter of an architect in Glasgow and a grandniece of Lord Kearney. But she was also cousin of our legendary father, Tom Maguire, who was well known, who was born in around 1800, ordained around 1820. And he was famous because he had a debate in Dublin that lasted 6 days, a religious debate which he won. And it said she was also a grandniece of Dr. Dennis Kearney, or Dennis Maguire. So it linked her from Scotland to West Cavan. So I said it was fantastic information, and especially on Father Tom Maguire, who went to Clare and made speeches for Dr. Daniel O'Connell, and helped him in his election for, as we all know, for Catholic emancipation. So they were a very influential family. And even though it says she was born, it ended up that she was born in Dublin, the mother. So it linked her back here, and her mother was a McMahon. So little by little you have to go in and out to try and build the jigsaw of this family. So because the church records in Lara don't start till 1876, we don't have the baptism record for Dr. James Matthews, but we have his parents, and we have a home address because he was related to the priests that were there. And at the home address we had the 1821 census to bring him back to his family there and to his father who was there, but we didn't have the mother there now. But it brought that family back to the 1700s, and they thought they were from Tipperary. So little by little you have to keep digging, and it depends on what information you're given, if you can do it quickly or not. And the longer you spend at something, I says, the harder it is to find. Do you want to go on to something else?
So we'll just look at...
I'll let you do that.
Yeah, just look at naming patterns for first names. It's not absolutely universal, but generally speaking, the first son is named after the father's father, second son the mother's father, third son after the father himself, and the fourth son the father's eldest brother. We find that quite a lot. As I said, not absolutely universal, but it's certainly in regard to the first son. If you have the first son is, you can see the patterns. Again with the daughters, not so much, but generally after the mother's mother, the first daughter, the second daughter after the father's mother, third daughter after the mother herself, and the fourth daughter the mother's eldest sister. So then, just for anybody who's not familiar with townlands, but I know most of you here are, so we'll just have a quick run through. A basic land unit to identify a small area of land at a local level. It's the smallest administrative division, still in continuous use today as an administrative and geographical unit. I don't know if William and Paddy want to talk about it in relation to Northern Ireland.
I'll refer to it in my talk.
What? You'll refer to it in your talk, okay, William? Yeah. Approximately 62,205 townlands in Ireland. I hope this is true. No other country in Western Europe can claim territorial divisions of such antiquity. And the oldest version of townland names among the first written records of the medieval period. Used as a basis for plantation grants, land valuation, surveys and census enumeration. And obviously names have changed over the years. And I mean, Concept and I have talked about this at length, where we sometimes in a record we'll find a new townland that we haven't found before, and it's just buried in some record somewhere. We can identify roughly where it is, but it's a good one. We haven't found too many of them, but a few. And it generally refers to a physical feature in the landscape. So, for example, this is kind of Drumlin County along with Monaghan, so a lot of our townlands begin with Drum. So I'm taking this wonderful paragraph from I don't see her here today. Oh, she's there. From Maura's article, a wonderful article in Breffni in 1999, I think, Maura. or 2000 on the 8 townlands in Killashandra, and she starts her article with this: the townland is the distinguishing hallmark of rural Ireland, the small land unit, micro-territory which identifies its inhabitants and locates them within a wider landscape, the home address, the common habitat of several surnames over many generations. The territorial framework of the townland has its origins in the remote past. It is an area generally bounded by natural features and containing within its boundaries approximately 300 acres of land. And it varies, much bigger townlands and smaller townlands as well than 300. While its significance as a unit of land lies in an older Gaelic system, today it is a well-recognised administrative and geographical unit occupying the contemporary landscape. This being the case, it contains within itself elements of continuity and change which render it an appropriate avenue of research for the historians. So then just briefly, if you wanted to talk about parishes, Brendan, you want to? And baronies.
I just got thrown that one as I was walking up, and you'll do that one too. One of the things I should say as well, I mean, Mary was saying, getting the information from the families, and it's so important to get that. Of course, sometimes the families are wrong, and you can't always believe what they say, because it can go back a generation or two, and who was listening to Granny when she was waffling in the corner and you were a 10-year-old, and so sometimes people pick up things wrong, and so it's always like, if someone says they were definitely born in 1849, just check a couple of years either side of that, just be on the safe side, because oftentimes that'll happen, and that it won't be just on that exact date. So that's just something you just need to keep in mind when you're looking at some of these records and so on. So the whole parish system evolved. It was originally the monastic centres that grew up first. That was the first. It was a monastic. The church in Ireland was monastic rather than diocesan up until the sort of 12th century onwards, when the reforms of St Malachy come in the 12th century. We'll be looking at Drumlane Abbey, hopefully, if it stays dry, and we'll be talking a wee bit about that down there anyway. But then from the 11th, 12th centuries onwards, the parochial system becomes more organised, and with the Reformation then comes the dissolution of monasteries. The Reformation is introduced into Ireland in 1536. But it really doesn't take effect, it's certainly in terms of monastic dissolutions, outside the Pale for another generation or two. Like, for example, Drumlane, even though the monasteries are supposed to be dissolved in the 1530s, and by and large within the Pale they are, outside that it doesn't really work, and so Drumlane isn't dissolved until the later 16th century. And there's a wonderful comment, I often think of it, when once the monasteries are dissolved or shut down, they go out to lay hands generally, and so these commissioners have to go around the monastic sites and see what exactly they own and so on. And so they're going to Granard, and these guys which is just on the borderlands area, and they say we cannot go into Granard for fear of the wild Irish. And I think nothing changed about Granard since. Sorry, Granard's a lovely town. It's very nice. This is online again. I forgot about that. Granard is great. Anyway, I can't resist that one. It's so funny. When the Catholic Church they start creating, amalgamating, I suppose, some of these smaller parishes into larger ones as well, and they sort of divide as the population increases. Now, the Catholics and Protestants adopt slightly different parochial structures as well, so you sometimes have to keep that in mind, that what might be the parish of, I'll say Anna, just to pull one out of the hat, may not be the same in relation to Catholicism as it might be to Protestantism, and so it's just something you just need to keep in mind when you're looking at these things. And then the baronies as well, as I was saying, and I think Father Liam was saying yesterday as well, what's now Cavan is basically what was East Breffni back in the day. And East Breffni, they had these subdivisions called tuas. These smaller kingdoms were ruled by smaller chieftains, and that again is something that Father Liam was mentioning yesterday. That in Ireland, in Gaelic Ireland, the Gaelic clans were always fighting amongst themselves. You know, Ireland was quite easy, I suppose, in one way to invade and take over, because the Irish very rarely put up a unified fight. It only happens like in the 9 Years' War, maybe, or maybe slightly after the Kildare Rebellion, something like that happens. So the Gaelic Irish are oftentimes fighting each other, and because of these small territorial divisions, which are often called countries, O'Reilly's country, or McBrody's country, or whatever it may be, or Rourke's country, like country, you know, like
It's really the Irish for country, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So you have, as I say, 8 baronies in Cavan at that time. Now you have Lough T upper and lower, but that's basically sort of Lough T now, really, rather than anything else. So there's some of those administrative divisions. Do you want me to look at roots, or do you want me to? I'll stand down for a minute.
We'll just
I've offended enough people this morning.
We'll just have a quick look at surnames. This is Dr. Edward MacLysett, probably Ireland's greatest surname expert and genealogist, and he said that surnames were one of the greatest heirlooms of all, and despite hundreds of years of immigration and internal migration, I mean, you saw some of Liam's maps yesterday, the same surnames still appear in the same areas where they were hundreds of years ago. So the McGoverns in West Cavan, the Rileys where they always were, and so on. So before there was other names, surnames were important according to MacLysett. So adoption of hereditary or inherited surnames from about 2 or 3 over a transition period of about 200 or 300 years between the 10th and 13th century. Chinese, of course, the earliest, they have great ancestry, respect for ancestors. So the earliest to have actually hereditary surnames. So we'll just look at some of the identifiers and influences in surnames. So we have descriptive or characteristic, something that describes the person, their hair colour, their complexion, whether they're small or big. So Dove, black, Bawn, white, Rua, red, or a personality trait. Occupational or patronymic. So sometimes they go together. Occupational is much more important in English surnames, and I will have a list of that in a minute. So patronymic is from an earlier ancestor, from a father or earlier ancestor. And toponymic from a place name. So from a physical feature in the landscape or human activities, like just hill, town end, church. You don't think of that when you hear the name Townend. It comes from the end. He's from the end of the town. And then, as I said, patronymic based on the father's name or earlier ancestor. Sometimes the occupational and patronymic are mixed in. So just look at some of English occupational names. So a tailor, I put the Y there, but from a tailor, Turner, Clark, Baker, Carter, Marshall, Knight, Ploughman, etc. Butler, Mason, Miller, and so on. And a lot of English surnames are occupational names. English toponymics then, again, very important. Green, Wood, Church, Endicott. So he's from the end of the line of cottages. So it's... we kind of don't think of that. Prescott, I think, is a priest's cottage or a priest's house. Churchill, I forget what Schofield is. I think it's a hut in a field. Does anybody know? Am I right? So I think Schofield is a hut in a field. So Bridge, somebody that lived near the bridge. So some of them are fairly obvious. So then the Macs and O's, before hereditary surnames, the names kept changing every single generation. So let's say we had a man called Donal MacArth. Donal, he was Donal, son of Art, and his son might be Diarmuid, so he became Diarmuid MacDonald. And then Diarmuid's son, Conor MacDiarmuid. Then maybe Conor's grandson. The O names come from an earlier generation rather than a father. So the father is Mac, but the O names could be from a grandfather or great-grandfather or maybe further back. So And then just to look at some of the Anglo-Normans. No, I have the wrong one up, have I? Oh no, the Anglo-Normans. So Walsh, the Welshman, Fleming of Flemish origin, and so on. Toponyms from place names. Barnwall in Wales, Staunton, Prendergast, which is a name that I know about, supposed to be from Brontegeast in Belgium, but also from England. So there's a doubt about exactly where it originated. And then nicknames like Ferreter. Who would have thought Brendan Diarmid, a butcher? So nicknames, Dollard, not a very nice one, an idiot or a dullard. Russell, for a red-haired or red-complexioned person. And then, of course, the Fitz names, son of. Fitz is son of. So the Fitzmaurice and Fitzgerald, who we have here with Paddy's name. So then, over the years, the names became distorted by phonetic translation, by translation from Irish to English, and sometimes just substituted for similar sounding names, or a rare name to a more common name. So just to look at the translation, and sometimes it's very difficult to convince, Concepta has had a lot of experience of this, to convince people, clients of ours, that this is your ancestor, but that's not our name. So we had one in particular, people who were researching the name Fox, but most of their records were under Shanahy, from the Irish word for fox, which is Shunnock. And they could not accept that these are their people, but that's the way it is. Mulvanity, Bannock is the Irish word for blessing, so there's another one that would happen frequently, where we have you might have 5 or 6 children, 3 of them might be called Blessing and 3 of them might be called Mulvanity. My personal favourite, is kind of a West of Ireland name, is the name Bones, Neefsey. Knov is the Irish word for bone, so Knovsha, Neefsey. It's almost a distortion rather than a translation. McAteer, and I have some examples of these in the church records, which I'll show you in a minute. So McAteer, I think we have one family where we have McAteer, Carpenter and Freeman. So seer is the Irish word for tradesman, so that's carpenter. And then seershuk is the Irish word for freedom, so freeman, so So then Gorham is the Irish word for blue. So Gormley and Bloomer, Macula Owen, Macaloon, Monday, and that we have those records in Anna where they go from those 3 names. O'Dovan, Devan and Kidney, McGowan, Gow, Smith. Then we have, in the parish of Den, we have Sarahans who changed their name to Sullivans for some unknown reason. Caldwell and Cullivan, the same as well. Just not really a translation, just changed to a similar sounding name. And in West Cavan, Hultahan and Nolan. So just to look at some of those examples. Well, this is our favourite, going back to 1750s or thereabouts in Lurgan. So we have James of Andrew Halfhead and Mabel Riley. So that's not a very pleasant surname. And it's then translated to, the next child is Michael of Andrew MacAlecken. Sorry, the first child is Michael of Andrew MacAlecken and Mabel Riley. Now, we probably wouldn't have discovered this but for the fact that Mabel as a first name is a very unusual first name, certainly for the 18th century in our records. And so there's not too many Mabels. So we were looking at this and discovered that MacAlecken, son of the half-head, Mac an Lachyan, son of the half-head. So who would want to go around with a surname called half-head? So that's quite a bad one. Then we have this one, a child called James Victory of John Victory and Bridget Clinton, and a sibling of James, Thomas McNaboe of John McNaboe and Bridget Clinton, a couple of years later. And McNaboe, son of the Victor, Bua, the Irish for Victor. So then this one is Bird and McEnany. So we have, I can't actually read it. Can you read it? Can you read it there? It's of Edward Birds and Judith Coyle. Is that here?
Yeah, just move the mic away a bit.
All right, sorry, okay. And the next one then is, the next time, they're McEnany, so Ain being the Irish word for bird. And this one here, I've just put the two of them on the one screen. Patrick of Peter Derry and Mary Freeman. And the next child is, I'd be better looking at it on the screen. Can you read it there?
Yeah, we can,
Yeah, Peter Freeman and Mary Tierney. And then she's Mary.
And the next time she's Mary McAteer. So, but they're siblings.
Yeah.
They're siblings. So you can see them there together. So we have loads and loads of examples of that. That's just a few examples. So it's something to be wary of when you're researching. So yeah, just to show the difference between the English and Irish surnames, you can see that 66% of Irish surnames are patronymic. In other words, we obviously, kin was more, maybe I shouldn't say that. Kin, it was very important to the Irish, whereas it's a bit less important to the English formation of surnames. So I think I'll let Brendan, if you want to do roots now, maybe. So we're just going to look at some websites and that we use regularly. This is our own Roots Ireland one, and we can do searches for you if you'd like that.
Okay, so
Do you know the time?
as part of my job, I'm the manager of the Irish Family History Foundation, which has just over 30 genealogy centres around the country, north and south. And William comes from the Ulster Circle Foundation, which covers Antrim and Down on our system. Mary, obviously, and Concepta cover Cavan. Paddy is here, and they have shipping lists from Oma. I don't know, is Eilish here today? She was here yesterday. We have a new centre in Longford, just outside Fermoyle, and so we have people working there as well. Just again, a couple of other things to keep in mind is that religions can change as well. So like I take my own background in that my grandfather was baptised on the 1st of January 1911 in the parish church, Protestant Parish Church across the road, and when he died in 1988, his funeral was in the cathedral on this side of the road. So these things can change as you go along. So always just to keep in mind that sort of thing, I suppose. And again, you know, I think it was Phil mentioned yesterday, an aunt. That there was family members you didn't know about, and again, like that, my father only found out quite recently that he had a baby brother who died as an infant, and he only found out about this in the last 5 or 10 years, and so we were trying to find where he was buried, and of course the problem is that with a lot of Catholic records is the burials aren't always listed, and so I spent a day in the presbytery down here with the trying to find him, but we can't find where he's buried. I suspect he's out in Cullis graveyard, but I don't have proof of that, but I suspect that's probably where he is with his mother's people, I would think. But anyway, so they're the sort of things you need to keep an eye on, I suppose, when you're doing this sort of research. Now, the website that we have here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight to Cavan, because that's where we are. Oh, I'm logged out. Keep me logged in, please. Yeah, and so are we on Cavan? Yeah. And so this gives you, this gives you the list of all the records that are online for Cavan. So you see there are gaps in some of the burials. You know, there are no burials for these particular parishes. Oh, this is Church of Ireland ones, are they? Yeah, Church of Ireland at the top. So the Church of Ireland is quite well represented in terms of burials, and they generally go back further than the Catholic ones. Not always, but you'll often find that.
It needs updating, actually, Brendan.
Yeah. And then you have Methodist records there as well, and Presbyterian, and Catholic ones. So you can see quite a few parishes there that don't have burial records. But one of the things that I really like about the site that I use quite a lot now is this thing down here called full text search. This is a fairly new feature, and I love this. It's a great wee toy. You have to select a county. You can't do it on an all-island basis, but you select a county. So one of the things that I did, and I gave a talk about it a year or two ago, was if you just put in a word, it'll pull up all the examples of that particular word. So if I just pop in, this is one I used before, foundling. And then you come up with, there's 8 pages of foundlings. And this one here, some of the names that come up. This guy is Patrick Kennypottle, so guess where he was found? You see? And you can find, like, there's one in there as well called Frost. So I thought to myself, when was he born? It was January. So you can guess what the weather was that night. So there's all sorts of things like that, and there's ones called rock or field or things like that. What was the one up in Virginia?
I know people forget about that.
Mischance.
Mischance.
Mischance was one. Imagine, talk about half-head and then mischance. Some awful names. But then you often lose them if you try and trace them along the way. You don't always find them because the names have changed. But you can find some of them along the way as well. And there was one I found, and I found her marriage. She was in the orphanage over here, and then she got married, and I think her guardian was the mother superior, or whatever you call the head of the orphanage. So then I took out an interest. I said, I wonder, does it list her father? And it didn't list the father. So it's quite interesting, those sort of things. And then if you want to look at occupations or anything like that, so I'll just stick in soldier, see what comes up. So again, these will be in the 11 pages of these. So I'll just take Martin Joseph Peters, 1865, and his father is John Peters, who's a soldier. He was baptised. He was in the Cavan parish, so he was probably in the barracks in town. So you're able to get that sort of information. If you put in illegitimate, you'll get all those ones as well. All those sort of things you can find. And one of the things I find as well, which is really interesting, is if we go to the Irish genealogy one, which has a lot now. Roots Ireland has an awful lot of the civil records as well, but this one has civil records as well. And so if you were to go in, now I find this website, I'm not just saying it because it's not our website, it's a bit clunky. You have to go through all sorts of stuff here, and if you're not sure of civil registration districts, it's quite difficult, to figure out are you looking at the right person or so on. But it's very, very useful, because you get the death records and you get the baptisms from 1864 onwards. So you're able to put together another couple of sources. But the one that always makes me laugh is you'll get someone that'll email in and say, you have a baptismal record for Brendan Scott, who was born on the 15th of May, 1865. So he's baptised, the church record, baptised on the 15th of May, so if he's a Catholic, he's probably born that day or maybe the day before, but in and around that date. Yet, when we look at the civil registration of the birth, he wasn't born till the 15th of June. How was he baptised a month before he was born? So, of course, the thing there is that you were fined if you didn't register the birth quick enough. So oftentimes the birth is registered as being a later birth. So in those sort of cases, I would always say go by the baptism, because the church had no reason to falsify the record. So a baptism, if it's Catholic, it'll generally be the day or maybe the day after or something. It'll be around that. Protestant ones can be longer. I mentioned my granddad there. He was born on the 26th of December and he wasn't baptised until the 1st of January. So there's about a week between that one. But in nowadays, of course, it's a whole different story. Now genealogists will have great trouble in this couple of centuries trying to figure things out now. But anyway, that's a whole different story. That'll be beyond our problem at that stage. So there's some of the ones that we sort of use. And really, the one thing that I would say, Mary and Concepta wouldn't say this themselves, but I can say it because I stand back. One of the great things about the Irish Family History Foundation and Roots Ireland is that if you contact us, I generally deal with the emails that come in through Roots Ireland at the inquiries thing. if it's a Cavan question, I'll often know the answer just because I know Cavan. But if it's down in Cork or somewhere else, I wouldn't have a clue. But we have a centre down there who does know. And that's the great thing about the Irish Family History Foundation, is that we have people on the ground who know this stuff. Like, as Mary said there, the Concepta, she'll find someone under a rock on the side of a mountain, and she'll know the name of that rock and how long that rock was there, and all belonging to the rock. It's extraordinary. And Mary, again, being so modest, would never say it, but she's the same. And we have people like that in almost every county in Ireland, and it just makes things an awful lot easier, that if you're trying to find people, that we know the people who know the people, if you know what I mean. So it's very, very useful in that regard. And as I say, we'll always try and help people as much as we can along the way as well. Now, I think Mary wants to talk about. Well, I'll do a search. Who throw me a name.
Does anybody want to search done?
Ruddy.
Ruddy.
Is it Cavan or just Ireland?
Cavan.
Cavan. Roddy or Ruddy?
Ruddy.
Or you? Actually, that's one of the other things as well I should have said. There's this nice little feature here, the standard surname. So that means then that if it's a Ruddy, it'll pick up Roddy, it'll pick up O'Ruddy, it'll pick up of the names. Oh, well, I'll have to fiddle around to find that. It's up there somewhere.
There on the PowerPoint.
All right, well, we can go back to that in a second. Anyway, so Ruddy, any basic rough year?
It wouldn't be common, Brendan.
No, but I'll need a year to put in.
All right.
1840.
1840. Have you any first name?
Thomas.
Sir Thomas?
Thomas.
Okay. Don't let me down, Roots. Don't let me down. Let me down.
I'm really glad that happened, because that's what happens to me.
Oh, okay. Well, you see, that could be one of the things. You see, again, people kind of... You see, when people oftentimes go to America and they could be looking at, they may have naturalised papers in America or somewhere else, and they'll have their date of birth on there. So then when they look on the Irish record, they'll expect the record to be there. But oftentimes, as Mary pointed out, the parish records mayn't start until 3 years after that, or 5 years after that, or 10 years after that. And so the record just isn't there. And sometimes people go, but it has to be, because he has the record in America. But just because the record's in America doesn't mean that the priest in the parish here took the record, or that record survived through. I mean, every survival, I always think like that anything that survives is a miracle, you know, so that we have anything at all from that time. Because particularly at that time, like, priests didn't have houses, you know, so they're lugging paperwork around from here, there and yonder. And that's something, again, that you often find if you look on the National Library, and they have parish records up online up to about 1880 or so, the actual registers, scanned out registers. And someone will say, well, my guy I know was born on the 5th of July 1880 or whatever it is, or 1870. And so they go 3rd of July, 4th of July, a gap on the 5th of July, goes to the 6th of July, where's my man? But the priest mightn't have added it in until later on, and he forgot that guy. He thought, oh, Jesus. And he sticks him in somewhere later. Like, and that happens up to quite recently. A friend of mine got married about 10 years ago, and he went to the priest, you know, just... you know, you have to go to the priest. I can't remember exactly where you have to go. So it was something to do with the baptismal register or something, I think. And so he went, and the guy went looking through the baptismal register, and he couldn't find him. And he says, you were never baptised. And he says, I was baptised, served in Knock. This guy was horrified. He says, I was baptised. So he went home, and he said, Ma'am, what's this about? And she says, you were baptised, I remember. There's a picture. Look, there's you being baptised. And so we went back with the picture, and the guy wasn't having it. And I was thinking, oh, please have to get baptised again. I'll hold you in a swaddling cloth. I'll stand for you, I said. I was his best man. I said, I'll be your godfather and your best man. This is great. Anyway, what happened was the guy went rooting through the register and found him sellotaped in at the very back of the register, because when they'd filled it in, the priest obviously forgot to put it in, and then remembered later on, and he'd gone on too far, and he said, I'll just stick it into the back of the register. So just, again, look either side of these things, because you can find them elsewhere. I did see one once where the guy who seemed to have been pulled in off the side of the road, the priest, there was some mention that the priest didn't know who he was or something. He was a man off the road or something. They needed someone to stand for the child, and so they just some guy was walking by, so when he was brought, you know.
But if you get to know your family history, you'll see how the sponsors are related.
Yeah, yeah. So can I search someone? This gentleman down the back?
Fee, F-E-E.
Yeah.
Owen Fee.
Owen, rough date?
What?
A date, rough date?
Rough date of 1840. Yeah, 1840. Actually, we happen to be sitting next to the Fee. And we are Fee.
Okay, so, but do you have, if you have a rough date of?
What did you do? 1820. 1820.
I'll say 1840 and I'll give it 10 years either side. So that thing there gives you, that'll go then from 1830 to 1850 when I put in that. So it's a good wide search. So let's see. We have one. Oh, these are from Fermanagh. Oh, that's probably a Canolly or Derry Lynn or something like that. Canolly. That's an Owen Fee in Canolly and Fermanagh, just over the border. It's in the diocese.
Spreads across the two.
Yeah, it goes across, it goes into Fermanagh because it's in the diocese of Kilmore. So that's the one there. And then you see then the father Pat Fee and the mother Susan McGarren. And then Hugh McGarren and Margaret McGarren, so related to the mother, the sponsors in that one. So again, so it has the date of baptism. Usually with these, because it doesn't actually list the date of birth, so we don't generally put in the date of birth, but you can take it that it was probably that day or the day before, or something like that. When you think actually just the logistics of it, you know, sometimes you see there could be 2 or 3 baptisms in a day, and you know, like they had to go find the priest. Quick, smart. They couldn't just text them, you know. So it's impressive, and they're baptized in their homes. Exactly, yeah. So you know, so it's often, and then sometimes you'll see you'll have the fee, the price, what the priest charged. You'll see on the site 2 and 6. I see quite a bit, but.
Ladies and gentlemen, this brings the lecture element of our event to a close. Our final speaker is Dr. William Rulston. William is a research director of the Ulster Historical Foundation since 2006 and grew up on a farm in the Fyle Valley, and much of his research reflects his interest in the interaction between people and land. He has lectured widely, including the spring lecture which we heard, and those of us who were up there in the Mellon Centre for Migration Studies in Omagh this year, on records on roots, people and the land in North West Ulster, and he has written and edited a number of publications on different aspects of Irish and Ulster history, including Fermanagh History and Society, edited with Eileen Murphy, Researching Scots-Irish Ancestors, 3 Centuries of Life in a Tyrone Parish, A History of Donaghedy, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, 1600 to 1900. Also Abercorn, The Hamiltons of Baronscourt, Transatlantic Lives, The Irish Experience in Colonial America with James Quinn and Lindy Lunny, Research on Presbyterian Ancestors in Ireland, and also in 2022 he was co-editor with Dr. Liam Campbell of Lough Neagh, an Atlas of Natural, Built and Cultural History. Dr. Liam is director of the Mellon Centre for Migration Studies, where Paddy is based as well. William is also a Fellow of the Society of Antiquities of Scotland, and today he's going to speak to us on researching our farming ancestors. And as luck would have it, he has the very book, Researching Farming Ancestors in Ireland. It's quite expensive, but it's only a tenner today. And he has a car boot full of them. So before you go, get your copy. Ladies and gentlemen, William Rulston.
Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'd like to thank Tom for his kind words of welcome. Thank Mary, who extended the invitation to me initially. It's a great pleasure and honour to be here with you for this 2-day conference. I really enjoyed the lectures yesterday and again this morning. And it's great to see this room full of people, packed out. That's fantastic. So what I'm going to do in this talk is to break it into 3 parts. The first part looks at landed estate papers and picks up on some of the themes you've heard already from our colleagues in Galway. And then I'm going to be looking at case studies of my own family background and how some of the principles of what I encountered as I traced them can be applied hopefully to your own particular situations. So first of all, you've heard about landed estate papers, you've heard about their importance. Well, just why should we think of landed estate papers when we're researching our farming ancestors? Well, first of all, as has been mentioned, until the beginning of the 20th century, the overwhelming majority of farmers in Ireland were tenants on an estate. They didn't own their land. It wasn't until the passing of a series of Acts of Parliament from the late 19th century onwards that farmers in Ireland, across the entire island, were enabled to buy out their farms and so become proprietors of them, so own them now in their own right. So we see the eclipse of the landed estate system and the creation of a proprietorial class of farmers. Now, one of the challenges with landed estate papers, and I'm going to be showing you examples of those and telling you where they may be found, but at the same time, we need to face up to the fact that records may not survive. For whatever reason, the records generated by a particular landed estate may simply not exist. They may have been burned, deliberately or accidentally, pulped as scrap paper, whatever. Surviving records may not be comprehensive. So you may have one particular item, a rental for 1850, and that's all. So a lack of comprehensiveness in the records may also be a challenge you encounter. Something else to bear in mind, the second from bottom point, your ancestor may not have leased from the owner of the land, but rather from a middleman. In other words, there may have been an intermediary between your ancestor, the farmer, and the person who owned the land. And the records of those intermediaries or middlemen are often the hardest to find. They may be the records that simply don't exist. So that's something else to bear in mind. And occasionally, the records that do exist may not list all of the occupiers of the land. If farmers were joining together, a group of farmers corporately coming together to take land to farm, it may be that only one of them was named in the estate record, something else to bear in mind. So I would point out that those are some of the things to just be aware of. But don't let them put you off. Don't let them blind you to the great potential there is with landed estate papers and how they can help you find out more about your ancestors. Well, what can you find within landed estate papers? What are the main categories? Well, I'll be looking in more detail at some of these through the talk, but just briefly to mention leases, the lease arrangements between landlord and tenant, lease books, rentals, surveys, maps, correspondence, and occasionally, not very often, but occasionally you may find manor court records. The manor court being a legislative body that dealt with matters pertaining to the estate, organised under the auspices of the landlord, presided over by the seneschal, which dealt with cases involving tenants. Maybe one tenant owed money to another tenant, or two tenants were disputing where the boundary of their family lay. They may be found within manor court records. Now, I've mentioned leases. Now, you can have leases that last for a certain number of years, and very often you'll find leases for 21 or 31 years. However, you can also find within estate collections leases for lives, or life leases. In other words, well, I'll just explain what a life lease is. Okay, well, a life lease, or a lease for lives, was a lease that would not expire until the individuals named in that lease as lives had died. Okay, so certain names of individuals will be written into the lease, and as long as those individuals were alive, the lease was still valid. Now, usually you'll find a lease for lives included a concurrent term of years. So it might say for 3 lives or 21 years, whichever was the longer. And nearly always the lives were longer than the 21 years. The number of lives varied from 1 to 5, maybe more, but typically 3 was fairly general. A 3 lives lease was fairly general. And what's really useful about these leases for lives is that initially, at any rate, it seems to have been the privilege of the tenant to choose the lives. And very often the tenant named himself and 2 of his young children as the lives in a lease. So from a genealogical perspective, a lease for lives is tremendously useful. Particularly if you're going back to the period maybe before the parish registers are available. Mary's already talked about the starting dates of many parish records, particularly some of them that don't start until the second half of the 19th century. So if you're getting a lease for lives from the 18th or early 19th century, it can contain genealogical information that you maybe will struggle to find anywhere else. And that's what makes a lease for lives so useful. Now, something to bear in mind is that for most of the 18th century, Catholics were not issued with leases for lives because the maximum term a Catholic could be leased land was 31 years. So for most of the 18th century, you'll not find leases of lives to Catholics, part of the penal legislation. But from the very end of the 1700s and into the 1800s, you will find leases for lives issued to Catholic tenant farmers. And one of the things that, from a landlord's perspective, well, look, a lease for lives was certainly a prized possession for a tenant. One study of the leases for lives on a particular estate found that the average term of a lease for lives was maybe 50 years. Okay, so it would be 50 years from the date it was issued until all the individuals had died, on average. That was an average. Okay, so you think something like that is certainly advantageous to the tenant. But from the landlord's perspective, well, he had to make sure that he had a proper record of the status of those lives. Were the lives alive, in which case the lease was valid? Had they died, in which case the lease had expired? Okay, so landlords had to keep that sort of information. And it became tricky when people were moving around. People emigrated to America. Maybe, contact was lost with them or whatever. Here's just a letter from the Erin Estate Collection and the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. It's from William Veitch, who's the agent to Lord Erin, and he's writing in 1770, I am apprehensive that the lives of Canotra Lease are now extinct by the death of James Morton of Belturbet. John James and George Lawrence and George's son, called George, are all dead. So in other words, this individual, James Morton of Belturbet, I think he's dead. The lease has expired. Now, interesting, there's a follow-up to that in which somebody says, no, he's still alive. You could ask his mother in Dublin. She'll tell you where he is. But it just shows you that occasionally within estate collections you'll find useful correspondence that can be extremely helpful in just illuminating the lives of our ancestors, helping us to understand more about them. Now, just to show you some examples of estate papers, I went into the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland last week and I hunted out a few different items. This is a rent roll of the Annesley estate, which would have been around Ballyconnell, where you're heading this afternoon. Dates from the very beginning of the 19th century. And you can see in this case, it's a large parchment sheet. It's actually, A0 size. It's quite large when you actually fold it right out and then folds down. Sometimes they're within bound volumes and you keep flicking the page, but this is like a large sheet. It sets out the denomination of land, the townland. And Mary was talking about townlands earlier, and she was just referring to the situation for townlands in Northern Ireland, just as a digression. Townlands are no longer in use in postal addresses ordinarily in Northern Ireland, but they still remain very important markers of local identity in rural areas. Those of us who live in the countryside in Northern Ireland, like Paddy and myself, know our townlands. and they still matter a great deal to us, although they're not part of the postal system anymore. What I'm going to do is is that noise coming from me?
I might switch it off. I don't think we need it.
You probably can hear William without sound.
Can you still hear me? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on this particular area because, well, first of all, like I said, we have the denomination of lands, we have the name of the tenant farmers, we have the rent and the acreage and so on. But I'm going to zoom in this column. Where to go? Ooh, that's vanished. It's very strange. Anyway, if I were to zoom in on this, you would see that it has observations. So there, it actually gives the details about the lives, the status of the lives in the lease. So it's like a little ready reckoner for the landlord to keep keep a record of the status of those lives. So it names the individuals who were lives. It gives their ages, which is tremendously useful as well. And then there may be a note about their exact status. So this is the sort of thing you can find in rentals. I'm not saying you're always going to find rentals like this, but you can find information in rentals like this. There's something else I came across in Prony, was this wonderful volume of maps of the Gosford estate, which was around Arva in County Cavan. It's an absolutely beautiful volume. The actual cartographer has gone into great detail in creating his own work of art. This is just the title page, decorative, as you can see. And if we go to just a couple of the maps within the volume, even the little cartouches here around the townland name, there's some effort has been placed to set those off. It maps out each of the townlands, and then here we have the names of the tenants, and you can cross-reference the name of the tenant, the number, to the map. So that survives for the Gosford estate in County Cavan from around about 1800. So there's so much available through landed estate papers that, I'm not going to say that you will find your ancestors in them, but you have to at least consider the very real potential they offer you in your search for your forebears. Then the main places to look for estate papers in general across Ireland, well, Prony in Belfast has a fabulous collection of estate papers, including material for County Cavan. The main repository in the Republic of Ireland is the National Library in Dublin, which is very extensive collections of estate papers. There are, to a lesser extent, you will find estate papers in the National Archives of Ireland. For example, there are some Nesbitt papers there for County Cavan in the National Archives. Just taking Prony, I've looked at the Gosford maps already. We'll go to the Prony website and you can read a detailed introduction to the Gosford papers. Now, the Gosford estate was partly in County Armagh as well as County Cavan, but it was a large collection of the papers, and that introduction, you can download it as a PDF from the website. You can, it sets out the background to the estate, the history of the estate. It looks at the scope of the collection, what's available. It lists the townlands that formed that estate as well. So it's a very useful thing to have to hand if you happen to be researching an ancestor who lived on the Gosford estate. I mentioned the National Library of Ireland, and one of the best collections for County Cavan, well, the best collection for County Cavan estate papers in the National Library are the records of the Farnham estate. Now, the Farnham estate was the largest estate in County Cavan, just under 30,000 acres, a rather fragmented estate, it must be said, but you can view the papers for that estate in the National Library. And there's also a very good PDF of the collection list here that you can, again, download, and that will detail the information found in that. And I know that was actually put together by Dr. Jonathan Cherry, who I'm sure is known to many of you here today. And not forgetting that there's a really good collection of estate papers here in this building, in the archives upstairs. Just earlier, Tom was telling me about some records for Ballyconnell that were recently discovered and accessioned. So there's some really good material held locally in archives across Ireland. The county archives, county museums in some cases, county libraries. And so here in Cavan, there's a really good collection of material, some of which has been digitised and made available online, such as this example of the Castle Hamilton estate over at Killashandra. I don't need now to mention this, but just to say that use this website. It's brilliant, wonderful piece of work. There's so much you can find in it. Now, let me just look for now at a case study involving my great-great-great-grandfather, Robert Rolston. First of all, you'll notice that his spelling is different from mine, okay? Even my own grandfather often spelled our name with an E on the end of it, you know, so don't fix too much importance on the spelling of a name. Always keep an open mind on that. But I remember the day well. It was the 30th of April 2004, and I had returned home to the home farm for my brother's wedding the next day, and as I arrived home, my mother said to me, "You'll never guess what's turned up. This will be like gold to you." Okay? It wasn't the experience of Brendan's friend when he went to the priest to get a baptism record, and it couldn't be found. This was the discovery of something that had lain hidden for generations. My father had been in at the solicitor's office on some routine business at the start of the week, and the solicitor said to him, "Look, I've got this bundle of documents. I was going to dispose of them, but if you want them, you can take them with you." My father said, "No, well, I'll take them with me." Brought them home, and when I got there, I looked through them, and inside it was the original lease for the farm from 1835. Robert Rolston was issued with this lease in January 1835. He was a tenant on the estate owned at that time by the Marquess of Abercorn. It was a vast estate. At its height, it extended to some 70,000 acres, about 50,000 in County Tyrone, about nearly 20,000 in County Donegal. So this was the lease issued to him. Again, you can see it's parchment. Part of it is printed onto the parchment with then gaps to allow other details to be filled in, such as the name of the tenant, the exact date the lease was issued, the terms in which it was issued, and so on. So here it is. And then down at the bottom, we have the signature of the Marquess of Abercorn, and then we have the signature of Robert Rolston, my 3 times great-grandfather. So that was within the package. So that was a wonderful thing to find, the original lease for the farm. But then the question was, well, when did Robert move to the farm in Gordavay? Maybe he was born there, maybe he grew up there. So then I turned to the Registry of Deeds in Dublin. And the Registry of Deeds was established in 1708 as a repository for all kinds of documents relating to the legal transfer of title to land. Now, to go into it in more detail would be a separate talk. You can find information about it online, and you can get access to the records online now through the Family Search website. I have been to the Registry of Deeds maybe 24 times. It's a wonderful archive in which to work. If you haven't been there, it's definitely worth going to, if only for the experience of having used it. It's open weekdays, I think, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., something like that, or 4 p.m. It's accessible to the public. It's an amazing place to work. If you're going for the first time, there'll be a lot of trial and error, but you never know what you might find in it. I remember taking a group there some years ago of researchers, and as we were going up the stairs, because you have to go up to the top floor, she noticed on the wall a frame print, and it was actually a copy of a lease issued to one of her own ancestors. Now, That's not going to happen every time, I urge you. Okay. But anyway, in the Registry of Deeds, I was able to find the original document transferring the farm into Robert Rolston's possession. So the lease was issued in 1835 from the landlord, but as it turned out, Robert had been living in that farm since 1830, and he had taken it over from a Hamilton family, the previous occupiers. So this deed, this is a copy of the original memorial, which are kept in the vaults, and so they will scan this, they will post it out to you. It's very useful because you get the signature of, there's my great-great-great-grandfather's signature and his seal. Unfortunately, it's illegible and you can't make anything of it. But it does have the details telling me when he acquired the farm. So this Hamilton family had been in possession of it for quite a long time, probably. They then sold it. Now, when I say sold it, I really mean in inverted commas, because it wasn't, of course, an outright sale. Again, the Hamiltons were simply tenants, but as tenants, they were selling the right to occupy that farm to an incoming tenant. These Hamiltons actually didn't move very far. They simply moved across the River Foyle to Donegal, where their own descendants still live today. So within sight of the old farm, they didn't emigrate or anything, or to another part of the world. They actually moved simply within Ulster. So that allowed me to find out when he moved, but also told me where he came from. Because it said Robert Rolston of Ganahan, or Ganvahan, which is a townland near Castlederg in County Tyrone. So we know that Robert moved from Ganvahan to Gordavay in 1830, and then 5 years later he was issued with a lease by the landlord. So up until that point you could say it was almost like a tenant at will before he was issued with his lease. Now the farm itself is just here. This is the River Foyle. The city of Derry is just about here. Strabane is much further down here. This is the wide expanse of the River Foyle. So the farm is just here. One of the problems with the Foyle for farmers up until the early 19th century is the fact that it's a tidal river and had a major impact on the land alongside either side of it. So here are some early maps in which you can see, well, look at this one in particular, a major indentation here called Solace Bay. The Rolston farm is just here. So this is like an indentation of the river, which actually, you think of bays as being something you find on the coast. Well, here is a bay in a river. This is a very interesting map of 1824. That year there was a proposal to build a ship canal all the way from Lough Foyle to Lough Erne. Had it been built, it would have been quite an astonishing feat of engineering. Had it been built, it would have actually gone through the Rolston farm. So I could actually have potentially come here by boat today. It would have been a leisurely journey, but it would have been very pleasant. Now, one of the things that Robert did do on the farm was to, with others along the side of the river, was to build an embankment to actually hold back the tidal Foyle. And so evidence of that is still found. You can still walk along the embankment. Now, interestingly, one of the consequences of building that embankment was the creation of an island in the river. As you can see that quite clearly. This is the aerial view. There's the island. There's the 1830s map. No island. 1850s map. Island is just appearing. There's something appearing here. Early 1900s map. Well, Grange Island has now come into existence. So, we think, sometimes we wonder, well, what are the consequences of what our ancestors did? What's some of their legacy? Well, if we look at the landscape, we can see where they were building fences and ditches and planting hedgerows and copses of trees and so on, and we can still see their legacy in the landscape today. And that's something that's wonderful when we have farming ancestors and we study where they lived. Okay, another thing within this remarkable collection of documents, I've shown you the lease of 1835, was Robert Rolston's will of 1847. Now, if you know anything about testamentary history in Ireland, you'll know that, unfortunately, in 1922, tens of thousands of original wills were destroyed in Dublin in the destruction of the old Public Record Office. They were among the major casualties of the Four Courts fire in 1922. Within this bundle of documents, there was Robert's will. I'm not to go into detail about what it says, but one of the things very usefully it picked up, it named his brother as one of his executors. That brother was a Church of Ireland clergyman who went to Trinity College, Dublin. By searching the Trinity College Dublin records, we were able to find that brother, Thomas. It gave his father's name. It actually allowed us to go back another generation in the family tree. So we'd stopped at Robert, but with the discovery of the will, they're going sideways and back, we were actually able to find the father of Thomas and Robert, whose name was James, which we didn't know before. An interesting little thing, one of Robert's sons was named Hugh Love, was at that time residing in the island of Antigua, in the West Indies. What was he doing there? Well, he was only about 17, so he clearly wasn't, a big merchant or anything like that, or even a small merchant. Maybe he was an apprentice to a ship owner in Derry, who knows? But it still identified a member of the family who had found his way to the West Indies. 1847, significant year, of course, in Irish history. And what happened to Robert? Well, there's his gravestone. It's in Melbourne, Australia. Hugh Love Rolston. And you see by this time he is spelling his name the same way as we spell it now. So there's his headstone. Robert actually returned from Antigua, and thanks to discovery of his Australian death certificate, now not every territory or state in Australia has details of this nature, but from his Australian death certificate, we found out when he was born, where he was born, his parents' names, including his mother's maiden name, when he married, where he married, who he married, when he arrived in Australia, who his wife was, who his children were, what ages they were, when he died, what he died of, and when he was buried. All from his death certificate in Australia. Okay, so that's just some things. So you never know, basically you never know what you're going to find. And it's not even, I was going to say until you start looking, but sometimes you don't have to look and things will appear. And that's one of the wonders of genealogy. I mean, yes, it's great that so much is available online, but it's discovery of those little extra details, the unexpected, the serendipitous discoveries that make genealogy all the more worthwhile as we seek to find out more about our ancestors. Now, Robert Rolston, going back to him, where was he buried? Well, the nearest graveyard to where he died is Grange Graveyard. It's only about a mile from Gortavay. But he's not buried there. Where was he buried? Well, tucked inside the family Bible, and here we have the family Bible. Robert's not himself in it because it seems to have been purchased after he died. But tucked inside the family Bible was a little funeral card. There it is. I don't suppose sellotape is now considered the best way to hold things like this together, but this was done long time ago. But his funeral card, and these were just beginning to come into fashion in the mid 19th century. His funeral card tells us when he died, and it tells us where his funeral was to be. So it tells us that his funeral was to leave his home and to go to Castlederg for burial there. So Robert is actually buried here in Derg Parish Churchyard in Castlederg. And again, you think something like that could easily have been thrown out or set to one side or lost or kept by somebody else. But thankfully tucked inside the family Bible, this little slip of paper that now allows us to pinpoint where Robert Rolston was buried. So don't think that your ancestor is going to be buried in the churchyard closest to where they lived. Okay? We've heard already the story that Concepta told us about the grave being opened in Lara after 120 years, and then that allowed a connection to be made between the two places and the families. So your ancestor is not necessarily going to be buried closest to where they died. For various reasons, they may be buried somewhere entirely different. In this case, Robert was taken back to his home parish for burial. Okay, secondly, in terms of my own, a little case study is my own family history. Andrew Elder and agrarian radicalism. Okay, Andrew Elder was another of my great-great-great-grandfathers. He lived in Donegal, born in Donegal, died in Donegal, and we know a bit about him through one of the most precious things that we possess. It's this family records book compiled by Andrew's son, John James Elder, in the early 20th century. And John James Elder was a journalist with the Toronto Star newspaper in Canada, and he was a very, very keen genealogist. And when you think he was working in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, without the benefit of the internet or the amazing things you can find on Roots Ireland or any of these other websites, he was really corresponding with as many family members as possible in order to build up profiles of the different families. But he was a very, very keen genealogist. He did huge work on our own family history, my mother's side, and for other families as well. And contained within this book are dozens of family trees going back into the 17th century. There's just a page from one of them. Okay? So it comes down. It comes down, to the late 19th century. It starts in Scotland. Now, bet it starts in Scotland is probably not correct in this case. Or, well, it does start in Scotland, but where he starts in Scotland is possibly not correct. But the family had certainly moved to East Donegal by the late 17th century, or even the mid-17th century. So there's where they lived in Donegal. So city of Derry here, Lough Foyle is just starting here, Lough Swilly, just here, Inch Island, and so they lived in sort of the Newton-Cunningham area of East Donegal, and lived there for some generations by the time of the late 1700s. Now, within the family, as recorded by John James Elder, there was a strong tradition of an association with the United Irishmen. In the late 18th century, this spirit of radicalism was rife in many parts of Ireland and was particularly taken up by Presbyterians in Ulster. And Andrew Elder, or rather John James Elder in his family records book, writes that John Elder, one of his ancestors, was doubtless one of the 150 United Irishmen who were secretly drilled by Samuel Alexander in a field of the Castle Farm at Newton Cunningham. And he's another reference to Samuel Alexander, who was himself married into the Elder family, and who was one of another diaspora around the time of the 1798 rebellion. Those exiles who left Ireland on account of their association with the United Irishmen or with the rebellion in 1798. And so Samuel Alexander was one of those who basically got out of Ireland at that time to avoid being arrested, went to Philadelphia. So within the family, there was this tradition of involvement in the United Irishmen. And John James Elder was quite open about this. At the time he was writing, there were many who would have been quite, not wanting to admit to this sort of connection. But he's quite open, and it's fair to say he's slightly proud of his ancestors' association with the United Irish movement. So Andrew Elder, my 3 times great-grandfather on my mother's side, was the son of another Andrew, and Anne Jane Matthewson. Now look at the impact of migration on this family. Okay, John James, not John James who wrote the family records book, but John James, the brother of Andrew, died in Montreal in 1847. Oliver Matthewson Elder died in Montreal 1847. Okay, we know that's a big year in Irish history. They had gone out at that time, but caught typhus either on the way out or shortly after arriving and died within a few days of each other in Montreal. Robert stayed on the farm at Rohan near Newton Cunningham. Robert Blair lived in Melbourne, Auchnacloy, Ontario and Michigan. Clark Mathewson lived in Melbourne, Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Okay. One of his sisters stayed in Donegal, lived near Castlefin. Another sister married and moved to Liverpool. Okay, so there's one family and how they spread throughout the world. Now, Andrew Elder himself was politically active, politically interested, and in the early 1850s, the issue of tenant rights was a big thing in Irish politics. The rights for tenant farmers. It was a burning political issue. And in the 1852 general election, a tenant right candidate stood in Donegal, a Scotsman named Campbell Johnston. And Andrew Elder actually was out campaigning for this tenant right candidate. Now, what was tenant right? Well, it's something that's quite hard to define in many ways, but a very good, succinct description, I think, is this from John Hancock, an agent in Lord Lurgan's estate in 1844, before a parliamentary inquiry. He said, "Tenant right, then, I consider to be the claim of the tenant and his heirs to continue in undisturbed possession of the farm, so long as the rent is paid, and in case of an ejectment, or in the event of a change of occupancy, whether at the wish of the landlord or tenant. It is a sum of money which the new occupier must pay to the old one for the peaceable enjoyment of his holding." So in other words, this was something that really mattered to farmers in Ireland. In the north of the island, it was known as the Ulster custom. And it was certainly something really prized by farmers. The right they had to occupy their land, the right to fair treatment at the hands of the landlord, the owner of the land. Andrew Elder was someone who believed passionately in this cause. Now, as a result of his involvement in the 1852 election, he was given an opportunity to speak on election platforms, to decry the arbitrary behaviour of some landlords, not all, but some, and to really get himself involved in local politics. And firstly, the tenant right candidate was defeated in that election in Donegal. Unfortunately for Andrew, it led to strained relations between father and son. And as a result of that, Andrew decided, well, I can't stay in Ireland any longer. And he ended up emigrating to Australia. He stayed in Australia for a few years. He worked on roads, won various government contracts to build roads in Australia. But in 1855, he decided he would return to Ireland, make his peace with his family, see them for the last time, and then return to Australia permanently. So he came back. We actually have a record from a newspaper of the ship in which he sailed, arrived back in Ireland, but his mother said, "Look, please don't go." And in deference to his mother's wishes, he remained in Ireland. He didn't go back to Australia. His next move was to Scotland. Now, I've just said he remained in Ireland, and then I've said he moved to Scotland. Well, actually, he moved not across the North Channel into the Northern Kingdom of Scotland. He moved to a townland called Scotland in the Finn Valley of County Donegal. Okay? So again, Mary's talked about townlands and their importance, and they are so important for us as markers of our identity and locational fixtures of our ancestors. We know so much about where our ancestors lived on the basis of townlands. This is a townland named Scotland in East Donegal. And some of the townland names across Ireland are wonderful. I mean, very close to where Andrew was born in East Donegal, there's a townland called Hunger's Mother. Okay, that's the name of the townland, Hunger's Mother. Now, I don't know where that's come from. I'm sure maybe somebody does. But townland names have such meanings and such resonances with us. Anyway, he moved to a townland called Scotland, took up a tenancy there, and that's where he remained for the rest of his life. Built a house he called Ashgrove because of the ash trees, and that was his home. He married soon after moving to Scotland. There's his church. He married in Newton Cunningham. He married to Hester Thompson, whose father Alexander was a farmer, according to that certificate. In earlier life, he had been a farmer and a distiller. And here are their children. Here's Andrew's and Hessie's children. Again, just to emphasise the impact that migration had on one family. And I'm sure you can all quote examples like this in your own family histories as well. So John James, he was the family historian. Emigrated first of all to USA, then to Canada, to Toronto. Daughter who died in her teens, son who died in infancy, and Jane Mathewson, my great-great-grandmother, that's her. She stayed in Ireland. Another son emigrated to Canada. Daughter emigrated to Canada. Another son emigrated to Canada. Daughter who died in infancy. Son who died or emigrated to Canada. And then a daughter who died at the age of 25. Of that large family, the only one to reach adulthood, or rather reach the age of 26, to remain in Ireland, was my own great-great-grandmother. So look at the impact of migration on that and how families spread. In this case, Canada comes across overwhelmingly important in this family's emigration story. Now, in the late 1860s, tenant rights again became a burning political issue. There was a new Liberal government at Westminster, and farmers in Ireland believed that Gladstone, the head of this government, would introduce a series of measures protecting their rights. And so there was a revival of this movement campaigning for tenant farmers. And again, Andrew threw himself into this movement. He was instrumental in forming a local association of tenant writers in Castlefin in the Finn Valley, one of the earliest tenant right associations anywhere in Ireland. And again, he was able to speak out on different platforms in favour of tenant rights. In Ballybuffet in Donegal, on the 19th of January 1870, he addressed a crowd reputed to be in the region of 5,000 people. That just emphasises, how much issues like this really mattered. And they were cross-denominational as well. In 1852, Andrew seconded the motion which had been proposed by the parish priest. Okay? Again, in 1870, it's the parish priest who proposes the motion, and Andrew, a Presbyterian, who rises in support of it. What he says here is interesting for just the insight it gives us into where he was coming from on this issue. I'll quote from him. "My friends, the first act of oppression that ever fixed itself in my mind, and which occurred under my own personal observation, is the following. Some years ago, when I was a boy, I was sent to the estate office to pay rent to the landlord. While I was there, a dispute arose between two tenants respecting a ditch. The agent, after hearing the circumstances, got up and said, 'A certain thing must be done.' One of the tenants replied, 'I will not allow that to be done. I will not allow my land to be spoiled.' The agent rose again, and speaking to the tenant said, 'You have no land, sir.' The agent again rose, and I thought to myself, I thought my father had some land. But when I heard the words of the agent, I began to question in my own mind whether he, my father, had any land at all. I came home and told my father what had occurred. I stamped my foot on the ground and promised never to plough a furrow of tenanted will land in Ireland." So Andrew felt deeply passionate about this, but it was a long road for the tenant farmers of Donegal before their electoral influence was such that they finally had a candidate of their own elected. And that was in the 1879 by-election when Thomas Lee, a carpet manufacturer from Kidderminster in England, stood as a Liberal pro-tenant right candidate in Donegal and was returned, elected. So finally, the power of the landlord party in the county in electoral politics had been broken. And now a candidate elected on a tenant right platform had been returned to Westminster. Andrew continued his interest in politics until the end of his life. He continued to be involved in various causes. In 1877, he sent money to the parish priest in Columkill, who'd been evicted, so that he could build a new house. He remained politically active, politically aware. When he died in 1886, his son, John James, remarked that all of the matters that his father had campaigned for, political matters his father had been campaigning for, were now in the statute book, with one exception, the abolition of the House of Lords. Andrew Elder died in 1886, buried here at Carnoan Presbyterian Church, a church that he himself had helped to construct when it was rebuilt in 1868. He never held political office. He never walked the corridors of power. And yet, he was one of the countless many people across Ireland who worked behind the scenes for the betterment of farmers in Ireland. And it's their legacy that we still see today. Thank you for listening.